Hello, everyone. You're here today with Jenny and Laurie of Astropath. Jenny is the owner-operator of Hidden Path Astrology. You can find her at hiddenpathastrology.com. You can find me at astrolore.org. Today, we're doing one of our astrobiography series, and today we're going to be talking about the musician Prince. His birthday was on June 7th. So we're talking about him right here around his birthday.
Nice.
Now, what do we know about Prince? Before we even go into looking at his chart, Jenny, can you give us a little snapshot of who Prince is? Or was, rather, because he's no longer with us.
Oh, which is so sad. I mean, Prince was just such a dynamic, complex character with just so much music and so many things that he did in the industry, so many things he did for music, so many he did things like just with his image. And really, I don't know, there's so many, it's so broad and wide, all the things he did. And I think probably most people in the world know immediately who he was. They've heard of him, they've heard of his music. He was risque, pushing the edges of things, but maybe even in more ways than you even realize. So he's just a very dynamic, complex person, an incredible musician and performer.
Yeah, absolutely incredible. I was really, I've always been aware of Prince, and, there are certain songs that come to mind when I think of Prince, but I didn't really realize the depth and breadth of his influence, not only in music, but in the music industry itself. It's really quite profound what he created. One of the fascinating things to me about him is that he became famous almost instantly. I mean, it was really crazy. He wrote his first song when he was 7 years old. And I can't remember when he first, I don't remember the dates or the age, but I think he was 17 when he first
75, I think.
Yeah. And he was almost immediately really well known and kind of just was like a rocket takeoff. He was born to two parents who were both involved in jazz, professional jazz musicians. So he grew up in a household where music was the thing. And that certainly gave him a leg up, and consequently writing his first song at age 7.
And so you should be aware that this man was responsible for at least 75 different albums. There were other things, other singles and things like that in there, but at least 75. I mean, so prolific. And then 7 different awards, 4 MTV awards, and numerous nominations besides those things. So this is somebody who's widely recognized, who really put out a lot of music, worked extremely hard, and was certainly not without his troubles. Let's take a look at his chart.
Yeah, and he also, I just want to say one more thing, is he died at 57 years old?
Yeah.
So 57 or 58 years, 57, I think. And, having put out all of that vast amount of music and having accomplished all that he accomplished, and he only lived 57 years. It's incredible to imagine what he would still be creating if he were still with us.
Yeah.
So let's pull up that chart.
Yeah, and quick note, you can watch documentaries about him all over the place. If you just Google it on YouTube, there's several. I watched a little bit of the behind the scenes one from 2017. There's another one called Slave Trade from 2020. There's a new one that's supposed to be coming out, but it's had some difficulties, so I'm not quite sure. But if you look it up, you can't miss it. There's all kinds of free stuff you can look at. Do you remember which ones you looked at, or did you just kind of...
I just sort of took a sampling of a bunch of, there were so many on YouTube that, free content. And I just kind of took a sampling of a bunch of them. Some of them were like 2.5 hour long videos.
I know.
I didn't have the bandwidth for that last night. Here we have Prince, born on June 7th, 1958.
6:17 p.m.
Yeah, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So we are going to start with our little way that we like to start. We're going to first look at the midheaven, because that is how we see him in terms of career and reputation.
Mm-hmm. It's up here.
So we are going to see that the midheaven, and we are using whole sign house system. The midheaven falls here in the 10th house. And look at that, 29 degrees Leo. Pluto is at 29 degrees Leo. You want to know why he was famous instantly? There's Pluto. You know, it's like empowering his career. Pluto is going to, you know, Pluto's job is to destroy what is necessary for transformation, or it's going to empower, or both. So here we really see, I remember Noel Till talking about, if Pluto's the closest planet to the midheaven, that there are really famous or powerful people that uphold us in our career.
Oh, yeah.
That's an interesting thing to think about as well.
Yeah. And I think just, you know, in the simplest of senses, like these are the transpersonal planets, Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, the 3 transpersonal ones. So when you see one of those planets, it really is likely you're seeing a person that is larger than life, and right next to the midheaven, which is a very sensitive point, which changes very quickly. So to be born at exactly this moment is quite a thing. Yeah. And it makes a big statement about exactly what Lori's saying. But in the simplest sense, it's like, yep, this is a person who's going way beyond just the kind of day-to-day mundane life. Like they, especially when it's in that 10th house of career. So it makes a big statement about that.
Yeah, and it's also because it is one of these generational planets with Pluto right there on the midheaven. This is a life that is that changes the collective and is changed by the collective. So yeah, this is not somebody that's living a quiet life, uninvolved in the larger picture. Yeah, Pluto right there. He changed. You know, one of the fascinating things about Prince is he didn't just put out all this music and change music itself, but he changed the music industry. And I think that's really spoken to with that Pluto there, is the transformation of the music industry itself came through his involvement.
Yeah, and he took a lot of, he took a brunt of crap for his way of going about it. I mean, he did it in a way, I mean, there's many different chapters of when he was fighting the music industry, and people kind of they're pretty hard on him, and the music industry was not happy, and fans were kind of going, what's going on with this guy? What's he complaining about? But the reality is he was ahead of his time. Yes. And he knew that what was happening is that the musicians in a lot of ways were losing out. And I mean, he had made it big and made all this money and whatever else, but he was identifying the fact that his power was being taken away, and so were other musicians, and he didn't like that. And it made him pretty unpopular for a while. But ultimately, he did prevail because he has a big influence on why music is the way it is now. Yeah. And you know, you'll see in some of the documentaries there's more information about that. But basically, this is a big statement about that. And I just love that with Pluto right there. Like he did prevail. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
He took a brunt, you know, some blows for it, but
that destructive part of Pluto.
Yeah.
And the music industry was in such that time of, I mean, that was the time when Napster first came out and people were downloading music free. There's a lot in that. We could carry on.
But yeah, you'll see that in the documentaries though, if you check it out. I think, I mean, the other big thing about the midheaven I was going to go to next is simply it is dead opposite from the moon too, even though it's a little bit out of sign, doesn't matter. So that brings in like his personal, like his emotional being playing into that midheaven, and it's in the 5th house of creativity. And that makes like, you could sort of stop right there and be like, wow, you know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. That moon in Pisces being ruled by Neptune, you know, or, you know, co-ruled by Neptune and Jupiter. But the whole connection between Pisces and music, nice. There's that. And so that moon, that emotional, soft, tender moon in the sign of creativity has to be pulled up and expressed through that powerful place of the career.
Yeah, nicely said.
And then the only other thing that I'm thinking of is that this is Leo here. So we have to notice that the sun, which rules the midheaven, is here in the 8th house in Gemini. He's going to have conversations that are going to trigger people's faces off.
Yeah.
That's
yeah.
kind of
And,
simple.
with the sun, I mean, I've been kind of working with this a little more lately, and I like this idea of like the sun is in charge of the career because the sun rules the career because there's Leo there. So you're looking at the sun as sort of being the thing that's responsible to get his career out there. And how is he going to do it? By talking and triggering people's faces off. Like you just said, he's going to be doing 8th house activities with that sun that is going to ultimately be the thing that makes his career go. So it's just I like that fun little formula,
Yeah, the necessity to grapple with other people's baggage there in the 8th house, and then that opposition to Saturn, his own values, his serious values coming up against other people's beliefs about how he should be doing his career. That's really dynamic. And anytime, an opposition is going to bring stress. Yeah. So there's a lot of stress here for this man around his career and an incredible drive.
Yeah. And I think just to continue to flesh out that picture with the midheaven is there is also with Pluto right there, Pluto does square Mercury. So the things that you've just said, I mean, it kind of brings that even more into focus, this idea of having to have these difficult conversations, to feel stressed by these things. So the midheaven's really, you're starting to see here, there's a very dynamic tension driving the midheaven forward. And this is something you want to think about, what is driving this person's career? Well, the astrology is showing you some of the mechanisms behind that.
Yeah.
And so that's part of it.
That's fascinating, isn't it? It really is. Okay. Do you want to go on to looking at the ascendant now? We could continue on and on, but let's go to the ascendant.
The only thing I feel that you just have to mention here to complete the picture is that there is a T-square here because Mercury also squares the moon. And I'm just bringing this up to see so that you see that full illustration of the tension on the midheaven. And whenever you see a T-square, that is a very dynamic structure that's pulling the person in different directions that they must deal with in order to grow. And so it's hard and challenging, but it's very dynamic. So I couldn't help but add that because of it's just part of that midheaven picture.
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's so important. Wow. Yeah, this chart really kind of, it's very dynamic. I guess that's the word. Okay, I'm going to make all those lines disappear. Great. And we're going to stop thinking about the career for a moment. And we're going to think, okay, what if Prince was your friend and you went and hung out with him? Now, are you going to see a different side of him? What are you going to see from that perspective? Yeah. And so here we're going to look at the ascendant. And we have Scorpio rising in this chart. Oh, well, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, just as in terms of, if you think of the ascendant as the presentation of the personality. And Scorpio is that deep, dark, intense, kind of sensual, sexual kind of energy. And Prince just exuded that type of energy. It was not, it was very clear. And if you knew him personally, it was probably even more clear.
Yeah, I mean, this is really, having Scorpio here, it's like all the things you hear about Scorpio. And I think with Prince, it's like definitely the sexual and the sultry and the mysterious parts. And his ability really just to be a catalyst is what you're seeing here. So what this does is it kind of shows you that the direction of his life is in that Scorpio direction, where part of the huge purpose of his life is to move in that direction of being a catalyst for music, for the recording industry, all the things that we've talked about. It's powerful.
Yeah, how he presents himself is the catalyst. It's and all of the conversations and upheaval that people kind of freaked out about how he presented himself because he didn't dress the way somebody thought he should.
Well, part of the one of the documentaries I was looking at, it was talking about like how like when you're working in this industry and you're new, like he was, you're looking for that thing that's gonna like kind of explode your presence, make you larger than life. And so he just went for the real sexy, sexual, like gender bending, like pushing buttons, wearing all kinds of incredible outfits. I mean, this is the direction he went in, and it was very effective. He caught people's attention like that, and that is what part of what drove his career. And
from there, right. I mean, here we go. Okay. So we're thinking of that Scorpio rising. What rules Scorpio? Well, we're going to first look for the traditional ruler and look at this Mars just is very, very loud here. It is at 0 degrees Aries. This point in the chart is called the Aries point. And what the Aries point really tells us is that this is how a person is known. So yeah, it's not part of his midheaven, but this is, we know him from his sexual, dynamic projection of his personality.
Yeah. And I mean, Mars as the ruler here is just, I think it's very clear, because what you're looking at is you've got Mars, the planet of action, willpower, drive, in the 6th house of routine, of getting your butt to work. It's very happy in its own sign of Aries. It gets to do Aries things and get things started and ignite things and burn it up and really just apply an enormous amount of force to his daily routines. You know,
yeah. And one of the things that everybody says is this guy was a workhorse. He never stopped. And in the 6th house, Mars in the 6th house is going to work. And how many albums did he put out? This is Aries. This is fast action. This is instinctual action. He doesn't wait until he's got all the songs exactly fixed up. He just does it. I remember one thing that I heard, which was interesting. Let me see if I can remember it correctly. They were saying, you know, they were kind of comparing him to other musicians of his time. And they said Prince was the only one. You could put him all alone, which Aries is a very individual sign. You could put him all alone in a studio, walk away and come back, and he will have a hit. He doesn't need anybody else in there. All these other musicians, yeah, they might be able to do it, but they need the support. They need the other people. Prince could just do it, and he would just do it. That's the gift of Aries, is taking action without second guessing yourself and all the rest of it. Right. This guy, oh my God. It's powerful.
It is. And it's, you know, also the Mars is in a sextile with Mercury. So that just adds a lot of oomph to the way he speaks and what he's doing, and kind of a little bit of a relentless, or very just going to keep going. You know, he's got a bit of the battering ram with this. Like, this is, so I think that he knows what he wanted, and he was like going to speak. And there's some of the things, the video I saw, there were times where he didn't speak at all. You know, that was his thing. Is one point where he's wearing a mask and he's being interviewed, and he only is whispering his answers to his woman that he's with.
Wow.
And that's part of his statement. So, I mean, just think about that. Like, the statement of speaking by not speaking. I mean, there's something.
Wow.
And that kind of brings in the Scorpio, the kind of mysterious, the hidden, the different way of doing things. So it's quite a clear description of Prince. It's pretty
and then, you know, the modern ruler, if we want to just mention, the modern ruler is Pluto. So we're right back to that midheaven with Pluto. So, you know, the two of these really work together.
It's just a lot of potency and power, however you look at it. Pretty cool.
It sure is. Yeah, I think about that when you talked about that relentlessness of his voice, the relentlessness with which he went after the music industry. And you can think of the music industry as the, you know, other people's values, what they thought, how they thought the music industry had to be run. And he,
that's good.
Man, if they had looked at this chart, they would have just given them what he wanted, and rather than arguing with him, because he was going to prevail. There was no way around it. Wow.
So there's a lot, and there's probably a lot of ways we could carry on with this chart, but maybe we should just address the sun and the moon a bit more.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's think about the sun in Gemini in the 8th house. You know, that's the importance of the voice, the importance of speaking to people or things that have other values than the self. You know, grappling with other people's values and deep issues.
Yeah, it brings in a little bit of a couple archetypes for Gemini, or like the storyteller or the teacher or the networker.
Yeah.
I mean, in a way, he has such a powerful story when you look at his biography of the things that he did. And I think it was one of those things that in the moment he wasn't so popular, as we've already talked about. But I think as time goes on, and he will be looked back as someone who really massively transforms the whole industry. You know, as well as the music in his earlier days. It was just so unique and just such a character in his own right. So
yeah, and one of the things I think about with the sun too is, you know, wherever the sun is in our charts is a place where we are really ourselves. You know, it's like this is an area of life where you can really show up and be true to yourself. So when he's grappling with those issues that other people don't really like him pushing at, he probably really liked that. You know, that battle with the music industry was probably a place where he really enjoyed that battle. You think about that sextile between Mars and the Mercury. I think he was enjoying that battle. He knew he was going to win.
Yeah. I mean, I think, let's see, with the other thing with the sun, we did briefly mention it is opposed Saturn. Saturn is retrograde. So this kind of brings in some of those ideas around a wrestle with one's inner authority somehow, or a lack of authoritative love leading to self-worth issues, or those kinds of statements come up when you see Saturn retrograde in the 2nd house. I'm not exactly sure how it played out for Prince, other than there's definitely a challenge because his life was ended because of his problems with drugs, you know, and so there's definitely some kind of, you know, grapple or worth issue going on. You know?
Well, and there's also just, you look at that opposition between the sun and Saturn on a really simple level. It is an argument with authority.
Yeah.
You know, the authority of the music industry. He was going to go to battle around that issue. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to listen to Prince music for the rest of today.
All right. That sounds great.
Yeah. Okay. You want to move on to the moon?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's make that go away and think about the moon then.
So the moon is going to show you where his kind of emotional content is, his emotional issues on one level. Another level, really just simply the Pisces moon deals with the intangible. It deals with things that are beyond the ability to just kind of easily contain them. As you mentioned, music. So here is his profound desire for creativity to satisfy that moon. So to bring joy into his life, bring contentment into his life. This is a person who's going to have to do some kind of creating. Yeah. And we don't need to, he did.
And yeah, what are some of the archetypes for Pisces?
Pisces is the dreamer. It can be the mystic.
The musician.
Yeah, the musician. It can also be the addict. So it carries a whole spectrum of possible expressions. And given the nature, his chart is so complex, I do see a person who's pulled in different directions at once, very successful at the same time of being very wounded and grief-stricken and being able to do both. And that's kind of what is true about his life.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about this moon in Pisces in the 5th house. Yes, there's that emotional need to create, to give. So he gives love, you know, thinking of the 5th house as the area where we give love. He gives love through his music, through this opening up a, you know, vulnerable side. Pisces is also, you know, Pisces brings in issues of suffering. The 5th house is, yes, creativity, where we give love. It's children. And an important piece for Prince was he, and I believe he was married at the time, and they had a child who died like at 5 days old or something like that. And then later there was a miscarriage. So he definitely, and he was profoundly impacted by those situations. So I think, yeah, there was a lot of suffering in this life as well. I mean, there's all this dynamic stuff, but then on an emotional level, there was this deep suffering also.
And it's the other thing about the moon is it has good aspect to Venus and it's got a good aspect to Neptune. So those are both things that are concerned with the arts, that are concerned with aesthetics, that are concerned with spiritual values and transcendent art, you know, which I think certainly his music is transcendent. So he's got those things really support that moon. It brings in more of the artistic sense. And then it does have, we've talked a little bit about the opposition to Pluto, which I feel like just, you know, it just kind of blows it up. This makes it larger than life in a lot of ways. And it also, interestingly, has a square to Mercury. We brought it up with the T-square. And I think that just shows you a little bit of like, although he might have liked to fight and he's willing to go to bat for these different things, it had an impact on him. There's a sensitivity that he had to work with. And there was a fallout. There was a cost. And I think that might be some of the clues towards, you know, what he was doing at the end of his life. No.
Yeah. That's pretty interesting. And, you know, then we can't neglect looking at the rulers of that Pisces moon. So the co-rulers of that Pisces moon would be, for the traditional ruler would be Jupiter, and then for the modern ruler would be Neptune. So, you know, you can see with the Neptune, that would bring in the suffering equals drugs, or however we were thinking about that. Jupiter there in the 12th house, I feel like that was really helpful in his ability to kind of take this suffering and spin it into his music.
I mean, when you think about these rulerships, one way I like to think about it is like the moon is in Pisces doing 5th house creative things, but it's looking to its ruler as a resource. How is Jupiter going to help the moon do that? And it's kind of like this behind the scenes, larger than life work that he's doing, and that is going to help bring that in. And because Jupiter's in the 12th house, it complements that Pisces, like it's going to this sort of bigger place, this perhaps even sort of like the collective consciousness, or however you want to look at it, but drawing, almost channeling his music in a sense through that creativity. So it brings in a little bit of a otherworldly focus, I think.
Definitely.
Expand it.
Definitely. The moon has to answer to Jupiter. That's kind of the way I think of it with the rulership.
That's a good way.
You know, it's the same thing. It's just saying it in a little bit of a different way. But the moon has to, at the end of the day, that moon, the creativity of the moon has to answer to Jupiter and to some extent to Neptune as well. I think Jupiter really helps support its ability to function in a fairly good way, but then Neptune with its opposition and blah blah blah, the drug issue definitely you know, caught him, which is understandable. You know, there's no accident that musicians and drug problems go hand in hand. You know, they're both bring in that Neptunian piece.
And I think, you know, for those of you watching this video too, like if you go through and you do a more thorough analysis, you're going to find connection after connection in this chart, because it's quite complex. There's 2 T-squares. There's a whole bunch of different other, there's a lot of oppositions, there's other oppositions. So hopefully this is presenting you a little bit of a way of like doing it step by step, like focus on the one thing and then get rid of that and tune into the next thing, and then on, and then come to more of a synthesis towards the end. So
absolutely.
It takes a lot of study, but get it. Just do it bite by bite, and you will learn a lot. So,
okay. So, do we want to just wrap it up, or is there anything else we want to dig into here? I feel like we've done a pretty good, like, quick overview.
I mean, do you want to hit a couple of just the real quick highlights without getting into a big?
Sure. What do you want to touch on?
Well, just the simple fact that you've got Mars and Aries, you've got Venus and Taurus, and you've got Mercury and Gemini. Those are three of the three personal planets that are largely responsible for how you interact, your value system, how you communicate, how your drive and your willpower, and they're all very strong in their own sign.
Yeah, it's
and that's
incredible.
pretty unique. You don't see that
Yeah.
often. So
No,
I think
you
that's
don't.
cool. So I wanted to mention that. What about you?
I think that is just, it's such a wonderful thing. I mean, my mind goes to all kinds of other things that I want. You know, we could go into a million things. We could go into a million things, but I think we've kind of covered what I felt like was important. I
agree. Yeah.
I look at this chart, and this would be an absolutely incredible chart to study in terms of learning transits, because there's so much information out there. And what I have seen of different periods of time, they're so right on. So those of you who know more astrology, you know, really look at this, go track down his information, watch some of these videos and look at what transits were going on at different periods in his life. I love, just as a simple tidbit on that, he wrote his first song at 7 years old. That would have been Saturn squaring his Saturn and his sun. The sun ruling the midheaven. That would have been Saturn in his 5th house, really, you know, doing a creative project, a serious creative project that ultimately turned into his whole career. You know, he really started his career at that point, at 7 years old, when he wrote his first song. Another thing I want to just throw out there is that he was born at the disseminating moon phase.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Which is a lifetime of disseminating what you know. This guy obviously knew music. In his bones, in his blood, he knew music. Being born to musicians and growing up, obviously, in a musical home, he knew it. And his job was to dispense the information. I love this chart.
Yeah, it's cool. Really nice chart, and I'm glad you brought up the disseminating moon, because that's a pretty cool expression of this guy was on the meaning curve of things. He'd already done all the building, and whether you want to think about prior lifetimes or just different, or even genetic lineage, this guy was on the, like, let's bring meaning to this. And that's what that moon phase says. So I'm glad you brought that up. Cool.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Okay. Are we done?
Yeah, I think we're good.
Well, thanks, Jenny, for having this wonderful conversation. I really enjoyed this a lot, and I hope those of you who are watching enjoyed it as well. And I hope it gives you the inspiration to go listen to some Prince music and think about how this man really changed music for all of us.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. Thank you, Lori. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.